by the Bible writers, may mean the expanse of atmosphere that surrounds the earth in which clouds float. Isla 45. 8. Or it may mean the apparent vault or dome over the earth that is blue in the daytime and star-studded at night. PS 89. 37. In most cases the writer evidently is merely referring to what is high above man without specifying which aspect of the sky is involved. PS 57. 10. 108. 4. The fine dust particles in the atmosphere, the molecules of water vapor, and, to some extent, the molecules of other gases in the atmosphere, such as oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide, scatter the rays of light, the blue rays being most diffused, which gives the clear sky its characteristic blue color. Fine dust particles also play a large part in producing clouds, the water vapor collecting around these particles. The Hebrew word shachak sky is also translated film of dust, cloud, cloudy sky. It is apparently from a root meaning pound fine. Tusa 22. 43. Jehovah speaks of himself as the one who beat out the skies hard like a molten mirror. Job 37. 18. The particles forming the atmosphere are indeed compressed under the pull of gravity, and their outer limits are within set boundaries, gravity preventing their escape from the earth. G1. 6-8. They do reflect the sunlight in a manner comparable to a mirror. Because of this the sky looks bright, whereas without an atmosphere an observer on the earth would see only blackness in the sky, with the heavenly bodies glowing brilliantly on a black background, as is the case with the atmosphereless moon. Astronauts can observe the Earth's atmosphere from outer space as an illuminated, glowing halo. Jehovah used figurative language in warning Israel that, for disobedience, the skies overhead would become copper and the earth beneath, iron, and powder and dust would be the rain of their land. Doubtless under such conditions of lack of rain the shut-up, cloudless skies would become reddish, copper, in color, because increased dust particles in the atmosphere tend to diffuse the blue light to the point that the red waves are more prominent, just as the setting sun appears red, because of the greater depth or thickness of atmosphere that the sun's rays must traverse. De 28. 23, 24. Compare 1 Chi 8. 35, where heaven is used as referring to the expanse. Another Hebrew word occasionally rendered skies is Mayun heavens. De 28. 23. Similarly, the Greek Ra numbers, literally heaven, is also translated sky. When Jesus ascended toward heaven, a cloud caught him away from the disciples' vision. As they gazed into the sky, angels appeared and said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into the sky? This Jesus who was received up from you into the sky will come thus in the same manner as you have beheld him going into the sky." Act 1. 9-11, FTN. The angels, in effect, told the disciples that there was no point in their gazing into the sky, expecting him to appear to their vision there. For the cloud had caught him up, and he had become invisible. But he would come back in like manner, invisibly, unobserved by the physical eyes. Occasionally, sky is used in parallel with heaven. See heaven. Slander. See gossip, slander. Slap. See attitudes and gestures. Slave. The original language words rendered o textoi acute muritra longo, slave 978. God's servant, an example being King Nebuchadnezzar. J 27. 6. The Greek term doulos corresponds to the Hebrew word evedh. It is used with reference to persons owned by fellowmen. Mount 8. 9. 10. 24, 25. 13. 27. Devoted servants of God and of his Son Jesus Christ, with a human act 2. 18. 4. 29. Row 1. 1. Go 1. 10 or angelic ray 19. 10, where the word sin-do-lost fellow slave appears. And, in a figurative sense, to persons in slavery to sin. 8. 34. Row 6. 16-20 or corruption 2 pe2. 19. The Hebrew word na'ah, like the Greek term pays, basically means a boy or a youth and can also designate a servant or an attendant. Once a 1. 24. 4. 21. 30. 17. 2 Chi 5. 20. Mount 2. 16. 8. 6. 17. 18. 21. 15. Act 20. 12. The Greek term oimiddle.kets denotes a house servant or slave. Lu 16. 13. And a female slave or servant is designated by the Greek word pymiddle.diske. Lu 12. 45. The participial form of the Hebrew root shamiddle.wrath may be rendered by such terms as minister x 33. 11. Or waiter. 2 Sa 13. 18. The Greek word high-middle.p-middle.rtes may be translated attendant, court attendant, or house attendant. Mount 26. 58. Mr. 14. 54, 65. Joe 18. 36. The Greek term the middle.rapon occurs solely at Hebrews 3. 5 and means subordinate or attendant. Before the Common Era, war, poverty, and crime were the basic factors that reduced persons to a state of servitude. Captives of war were often constituted slaves by their captors or were sold into slavery by them. Compare to Chi 5. 2. Joe 3. 6. In Israelite society, a person who became poor could sell himself or his children into slavery to care for his indebtedness. X 21. 7. La 25. 39, 47. 2 Chi 4. 1 guilty of thievery, but unable to make compensation, was sold for the things he stole, evidently regaining his freedom at the time all claims against him were cared for. X 22. 3. At times slaves held a position of great trust and honor in a household. The patriarch Abraham's aged servant likely Eliezer managed all of his master's possessions. GE 24. 2. 15. 2, 3. Abraham's descendant Joseph, as a slave in Egypt, came to be in charge of everything belonging to Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh. GE 39. 1, 5, 6. In Israel, there was a possibility of a slave's becoming wealthy and redeeming himself. La 25. 49. Regarding conscription of workers, see compulsory service. Forced labor. Laws governing slave-master relationships. Among the Israelites, the status of the Hebrew slave differed from that of a slave who was a foreigner, alien resident, or settler. Whereas the non-Hebrew remained the property of the owner and could be passed on from father to son. La 25. 44-46, the Hebrew slave was to be released in the 7th year of his servitude or in the Jubilee year, depending upon which came first. During the time of his servitude, the Hebrew slave was to be treated as a hired laborer. X 21. 2. La 25. 10. La 15. 12. A Hebrew who sold himself into slavery to an alien resident, to a member of an alien resident's family, or to a settler could be repurchased at any time, either by himself or by one having the right of repurchase. The redemption price was based on the number of years remaining until the Jubilee year or until the 7th year of servitude. La 25. 47-52. La 15. 12. When granting a Hebrew slave his freedom, the master was to give him a gift to assist him in getting a good start as a freedman. La 15. 13-15. If a slave had come in with a wife, the wife went out with him. However, if the master had given him a wife, evidently a foreign woman who would not be entitled to freedom in the 7th year of servitude, she and any children by her remained the property of the master. In such a case, the Hebrew slave could choose to remain with his master. His ear would then be pierced with an awl to indicate that he would continue in servitude to time indefinite. X 21. 2-6. La 15. 16, 17. Female Hebrew slaves. Certain special regulations applied to a female otextoi acute muritra longo, slave 979 had to kill the slave but to discipline him. He was not to be avenged. X 21. 20, 21, 26, 27. La 24. 17. Also, it would appear that for the master to have been considered free of guilt, the beating could not have been administered with a lethal instrument, as that would have signified intent to kill. Compare New 35. 16-18. Therefore, if a slave lingered on for a day or two, there would be reasonable question as to whether the death resulted from the chastisement. A beating with a rod, for example, would not normally be fatal, as is shown by the statement at Proverbs 23:13. Do not hold back discipline from the mere boy. In case you beat him with the rod, he will not die. Certain privileges were granted to slaves by the terms of the law. As all male slaves were circumcised Acts 12:44. Compare GE 17:12. They could eat the Passover, and slaves of the priest could eat holy things. Acts 12:43-44. 22:10. 11 slaves were exempted from working on the Sabbath. Acts 20:10. 5. 14. During the Sabbath year they were entitled to eat of the growth from spilled kernels and from the unpruned vine. 25. 5. 6. They were to share in the rejoicing associated with the sacrificing at the sanctuary and the celebration of the festivals. 12. 12. 16. 11, 14. First century Christian position. In the Roman Empire slaves were very numerous, with individuals owning hundreds and even thousands of slaves. The institution of slavery had the protection of the imperial government. First century Christians did not take a stand against governmental authority in this matter and advocate a slaves' revolt. They respected the legal right of others, including fellow Christians, to own slaves. That is why the Apostle Paul sent back the runaway slave Onesimus. Because he had become a Christian, Onesimus willingly returned to his master, subjecting himself as a slave to a fellow Christian. PHM 10-17. The Apostle Paul also admonished Christian slaves not to take improper advantage of their relationship with believing masters. He said, "Let those having believing owners not look down on them, because they are brothers. On the contrary, let them the more readily be slaves, because those receiving the benefit of their good service are believers and beloved." 1T6. 2. For a slave to have a Christian master was a blessing, as his owner was under obligation to deal righteously and fairly with him. F6. 9. Call 4. 1. The acceptance of Christianity by those in servitude placed upon them the responsibility of being better slaves, not talking back, not committing theft, but exhibiting good fidelity. 2. 9, 10. Even if their masters treated them unjustly, they were not to render inferior service. By suffering for righteousness' sake, they imitated the example of Jesus Christ. 1 Pe 2. 18-25. You slaves, wrote the Apostle Paul, be obedient in everything to those who are your masters in a fleshly sense, not with acts of eye service, as men pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, with fear of Jehovah. Whatever you are doing, work at it whole-souled as to Jehovah, and not to men. Col 3. 22, 23. F6. 5-8. Such fine conduct toward their masters prevented bringing reproach upon the name of God, as no one could blame Christianity for producing lazy, good-for-nothing slaves. 1T6. 1. Of course, a slave's obedience in everything could not include disobeying God's law, as that would have meant fearing men rather than God. Wrongdoing by slaves, even when committed at the direction of a superior, would not have adorned the teaching of their Savior, God, but would have misrepresented and disgraced this teaching. 2. 10. Thus, their Christian conscience would govern. In the Christian congregation all persons, regardless of their social status, enjoyed the same standing. All were anointed by the same Spirit and thus shared in the same hope as members of one body. 1 Co 12. 12, 13. 3. 28. Col 3. 11. While o textoi acute miritra longo, sledge 980. Only by availing themselves of the deliverance made possible through Jesus Christ could individuals be emancipated or gain freedom from this enslavement. Compare Jo 8. 31-34. Row 7. 21-25. F4. 1-7. Heb 2. 14-16. See ransom. having been bought with the precious blood of Jesus, Christians are slaves, or servants, of Jehovah God and of his Son, obligated to keep their commands. 1 Cor 7. 22, 23. 1 P 1. 18, 19. Re 19. 1, 2, 5. See Freedman, Freeman. Freedom. See also faithful and discreet slave. Sledge. See farming implements. Sleep. A period of rest marked by the cessation of conscious activity. It is vital for the maintenance of human life and health. Being fully aware of the importance of rest, Jesus Christ was concerned about his disciples having time to rest up a bit. Mr. 6. 31 Jesus' example shows that, even in human perfection, rest and sleep are necessary. Compare Mr. 4. 38. Hard work EC 5. 12. A clear conscience compare PS 32. 3-5, and freedom from undue anxiety as well as trust in Jehovah PS 3. 5. 4. 8. PR 3. 24-26 contribute much toward making an individual's sleep pleasurable and refreshing. Content with life's necessities compare 1T6. 8. The servant of God does not have to spend long hours in arduous toil to the point of sacrificing necessary sleep and still derive no real benefit from his work. Compare PS 127. 1, 2. Of course, there are times when God's servants experience sleepless nights. If not due to sickness or other adverse or trialsome circumstances, their sleeplessness may stem from concern for fellow believers in the advancement of true worship. 2 Cor 6. 3-5. 11. 23, 27. Compare PS 132. 3-5, where the reference is, not to actual sleep, but to rest, cessation from activity. However, they do not need to worry needlessly about material possessions and lose sleep as a result. EC 5. 12. Compare Mount 6. 25-34. On the other hand, wrongdoing serves to make wicked persons content. They do not sleep unless they do badness, and their sleep has been snatched away unless they cause someone to stumble. PR 4. 16. While sleep is important, a person should not become a lover of sleep. PR 20. 13. Laziness causes a deep sleep to fall, making an individual inactive when he should be accomplishing something. PR 19. 15. For a person to prefer to sleep or to be inactive when he should be working is to choose a course that eventually leads to poverty. PR 6. 9-11. 10. 5. 24. 33, 34. Unlike men, Jehovah God does not become drowsy and require sleep. His servants, therefore, can rest assured that he can at all times supply needed help. PS 121. 3, 4. Only when, for his own good reasons, he delays or refrains from taking action, as in relation to those professing to be his people, but proving to be unfaithful, is Jehovah likened to one who is asleep. PS 44. 23. 78. 65. Spiritual wakefulness. When encouraging Christians at Rome not to be asleep or inactive and insensible to their responsibilities, the Apostle Paul wrote, "It is already the hour for you to awake from sleep, for now our salvation is nearer than at the time when we became believers. The night is well along. The day has drawn near. Let us therefore put off the works belonging to darkness, and let us put on the weapons of the light. As in the daytime let us walk decently, not in revelries and drunken bouts, not in illicit intercourse and loose conduct, not in strife and jealousy." Row 13. 11-13. Compare F5. 6-14. 1th5. 6-8. Re 16. 15. Those who engage in wrong practices or advance false teachings are asleep as to righteousness and need to wake up if they are to gain God's approval. Death compared with sleep. There is evidence that people sleep in cycles. Each cycle is made up of a deep sleep followed by lighter sleep. During periods of deep sleep it is very difficult to awaken a person. He is completely unaware of his surroundings and the things that may be occurring about him. There is no textoi acute muritra longo, smoke 981. It should be noted that the term sleep is applied in the scriptures to those dying because of the death passed on from Adam. Those suffering the second death are not spoken of as asleep. Rather, they are shown to be completely annihilated, out of existence, burned up as by an unquenchable fire. Re 20. 14, 15. Compare Heb 10. 26-31, where a contrast is made between the death of those who violated the Mosaic law and the much more severe punishment meted out to Christians who turn to a willful practice of sin. Heb 6. 4-8. Sling. See arms, armor. Slinger. A person who hurls missiles from a sling. The sling was usually a relatively short strap that was doubled over and whirled around. From it a missile, such as a stone, was propelled at high speed by releasing one end of the stripe. In early times, slingers of stones formed an important part of a military force. The tribe of Benjamin had 700 picked men, every one of whom was a slinger of stones to a hairbreadth and would not miss. JG 20. 15, 16. The Targums say that the Cherethites and the Peletites among David's warriors were adept slingers. Slingmen were an important part of King Uzziah's military force. 2ch 26. 13, 14. Sennacherib employed a corps of slingers in the Assyrian army, as monuments attest. The fighting forces of the Egyptians, Syrians, Persians, Sicilians, and others also had similar divisions. In the Roman army, slingers were among the auxilia. As late as the 1st century CE, Josephus relates that Jewish slingers pitted their skill against Roman forces. Jewish Antiquities, 17, 259x, 2. The Jewish War, 2, 422, 423 17, 5. IV, 14, 15I, 3. In ancient armies the slingers usually made up only one division of the foot soldiers. Archers, as a complement of the slingers, and a smaller number of spearmen completed the infantry. When called forward to begin an engagement or to stall an enemy advance, the slingers passed from the rear of the ranks through corridors among the soldiers. At other times they fired from behind, over the heads of the spearmen. Slingers were especially effective fighters when attacking walled cities. Their missiles, hurled from the ground, could pick the enemy off the walls or reach targets inside the city. 2 Chi 3. 25. When siege engines and assault towers were developed, slingers took advantage of the elevated positions their platforms afforded. An advantage of the slinger over the armor-clad swordsman or spearman was his effectiveness from a distance. It is claimed that their range of effectiveness was up to 122 meters, 400 feet with stones, and even farther with lead pellets. David's use of the sling. Much time and training was required to become a skilled and experienced slinger. Young shepherd boys attending and protecting flocks against beasts of prey developed the needed skill. The shepherd boy David felt much better equipped with his sling than with the heavy armor of Saul. But he doubtless would have been unable to stand before Goliath without faith in Jehovah and strength from him. The outcome of the fight depended, not on superiority of weapons or upon skill, but upon Jehovah, who supported David. As David called out to Goliath, "I am coming to you with the name of Jehovah of armies, whom you have taunted." And all this congregation will know that neither with sword nor with spear does Jehovah save, because to Jehovah belongs the battle. It was a stone from David's sling, no doubt guided and given unusual force by Jehovah, that sank into Goliath's forehead, striking him down so that David could definitely put him to death by Goliath's own sword. 1 17. 38-51. Smoke. The visible soot-producing mixture of carbon particles and gases from burning organic materials. Also vapor or a cloud resembling smoke. Aside from the mention of literal smoke, Heb. Ashen. Gr. Committal. Knows in numerous instances, there are a number of figurative uses of the otextoi acute muritra longo, Smyrna 982. Consequently, a rising column or cloud of smoke came to be used symbolically as a token of warning, a portent of woe to come or of destruction. Re 9. 2-4. Compare Job 2. 30, 31. Act 2. 19, 20. Re 9. 17, 18. The psalmist says of the wicked, in smoke they must come to their end. PS 37. 20. Smoke also symbolized the evidence of destruction. Re 18. 9, 18. Smoke that keeps ascending to time indefinite therefore is evidently an expression denoting complete and everlasting annihilation, as in Isaiah's prophecy against Edom. To time indefinite its smoke will keep ascending. Isra 34. 5, 10. Edom as a nation was wiped out and remains desolated to this day, and the evidence of this fact stands in the Bible account and in the records of secular history. Similarly, the everlasting destruction of Babylon the Great is foretold at Revelation 18. 8, and a like judgment is entered against those who worship the wild beast and its image, at Revelation 14. 9-11. Other illustrative uses. Just as smoke normally dissipates quickly and disappears, so it sometimes figuratively denotes that which is transitory. It is used with regard to God's enemies PS 68. 2. Idol worshippers Ho 13. 3. And the shortened life of the afflicted one PS 102. 3. As vinegar to the teeth and as smoke to the eyes, so the lazy man is to those sending him forth, says the proverb. Just as smoke causes the eyes to sting and smart, so the one who employs a lazy man does so to the injury of his own purposes. PR 10. 26. The psalmist, waiting for Jehovah to comfort him, says, I have become like a skin bottle in the smoke. PS 119. 83. Skin bottles, such as those used in the Middle East, hanging on the wall when not in use, became dried up and shriveled from the smoke of the house. So the psalmist had become at the hands of those persecuting him. Jehovah, in describing his creations to Job, calls attention to Leviathan, saying, out of its nostrils smoke goes forth, like a furnace set aflame even with rushes. Job 41. 20. Many Bible scholars believe that God here had reference to the crocodile, which, when coming up out of the water, breathes out a thick, steamy vapor with a thundering sound. Sacrificial smoke. Another Hebrew word, kamidal.tar, has reference to making sacrificial smoke, whether that of incense or of another sacrifice on the altar. 1 Ch 6. 49. J 44. 15. Such sacrificial smoke was viewed as a pleasing odor ascending to the one to whom it was offered. G 8. 20, 21. L 26. 31. F 5. 2. Smyrna, an ancient city on the W coast of Asia Minor, now called Izmir. Picture, Volume 2, p. 946. Early settled by the Greeks, it was destroyed about 580 BCE by Lydian Kingalites. More than 2 centuries later, Alexander the Great planned to rebuild it as a Greek city, this being done by his successors on another site. Smyrna thereafter became an important commercial city. When it became part of the Roman province of Asia, Smyrna, with its fine public buildings, was noted for its beauty. It had a temple of Tiberius Caesar and therefore promoted emperor worship. Smyrna was the second of the 7 Christian congregations in Asia Minor to which the glorified Jesus Christ directed the Apostle John to write a message. Re 1. 11. The congregation was said to be poor materially but rich spiritually. It was tested by tribulation, evidently persecution, and was blasphemed by some who called themselves Jews, but who were actually a synagogue of Satan. However, despite their poverty and tribulation, Christians of the congregation in Smyrna were encouraged not to fear the things they would yet suffer but to be faithful even to death in order to receive the crown of life. Re 2. 8-11. Snailheb. Shabmiddle.Bilal. Any of a variety of slow-moving mollusks, generally distinguished by their spiral or conical shells into which they can withdraw for protection. Numerous varieties of snails have been Otextoia acute Muritra longo, Saburnus 983 Jerusalem. Compare Tusa 23. 20. 1 Ch 11. 22. During most of the year there is snow in the heights and ravines of the Lebanon Range. Lofty Mount Hermon is snow-capped nearly all year long. 18. 14 Psalm 68. 14 refers to snow in Zaman, which is part of Mount Hor and Jebel Idruz, located near the Jordan. Jehovah, the producer of snow, can also control it. Job 37. 6. PS 147. 16 To serve his purpose, God has stored snow and hail for the day of fight and war. Job 38. 22, 23. Illustrative use. Snow is used in scriptural similes to help convey the idea of whiteness. X4. 6. New 12. 10. 2 Chi 5. 27. Dar 7. 9. Mount 28. 3. Re 1. 14 Sometimes it is associated with purity. Issa 1. 18. Bar 4. 7 For example, David begged God to purify him from sin, washing him so that he might become whiter even than snow. PS 51. 7. Job's 3 companions, being no source of true comfort to him, were likened to a winter torrent, swollen by melting ice and snow in the mountains, but running dry in the heat of summer. Job 6. 15-17 Sheol is said to snatch away sinners as drought and heat do snow waters. Job 24. 19 Just as snow is unnatural and would harm crops in summer, so glory is not fitting for a stupid one. PR 26. 1 However, a faithful envoy, one who would fulfill his commission to the satisfaction of those sending him, is likened to a drink that is cooled with snow from the mountains and that brings refreshment on the hot day of harvest. PR 25. 13. Snuffers. Golden implements used in connection with the lamps on the branches of the lampstands in Israel's tabernacle and temple. X 25. 37, 38. 37. 23. New 4. 9. 1 Chi 7. 48, 49. 2 Ch 4. 19-21 The snuffers are designated by the Jil Hebrew word malmiddle.commiddle.chayim, derived from a root meaning take. Use of the dual form suggests a device possibly having 2 parts. Accordingly, at Isaiah 6. 6 malmiddle.commiddle.chayim denotes the tongs with which a seraph removed a glowing coal from the altar. A distinction is drawn between the lampstand snuffers and the extinguishers in use at the temple. 1 Chi 7. 49, 50. 2 Ch 4. 21, 22 Though not described in scripture, the snuffers may have been tongs used to hold the burnt lamp wicks, while the extinguishers may have been scissor-like utensils employed to cut off the burnt part of the wicks. At the tabernacle, these trimmings, held by means of the snuffers, were deposited in fire holders, apparently containers for holding such pieces until their disposal. X 37. 23. So. An Egyptian king contemporary with Hoshea, the last king of the 10-tribe kingdom of Israel. When Hoshea conspired with So against Shalmaneser V and stopped paying tribute to Assyria, Hoshea was imprisoned. 2 Chi 17. 3. 4 Attempts to identify So with secularly known Egyptian rulers of this general period such as Ashur-Kanive or Shalbaka are very uncertain, particularly in view of the uncertainty of Egyptian chronology. See chronology. Saburnus. The Greek words any verb and any middle.fully middle.os adjective basically refer to being free from the influence of intoxicants. However, they are used in the scriptures mainly in a figurative sense. They carry the idea of being sober, moderate in habits, vigilant, watchful, or keeping the senses. A related word, middle.knepho, meaning, primarily, sober up, is used in the Greek Septuagint at Genesis 9. 24. Noah recovered awoke from the wine. Also, the Greek term is used in the same version at Joel 1. 5, where the prophet calls to the spiritual drunkards of Israel to wake up, and at Habakkuk 2. 19, where woe is foretold to the worshippers of idols who say to pieces of wood and stone, awake. in enumerating the qualifications for those who would be appointed as overseers in the Christian congregations, the Apostle Paul states that the overseer should be moderate in habits Nephili middle.os. It would include freedom from overindulgence in wine, as it is also stated that he is not to be a drunken o textoi acute muritra longo. Soko H 984 death. 1 Co 11. 30. In a similar vein he had written previously to the Thessalonians, who has been troubled by persons advocating things not taught by the apostles. He said, concerning Jehovah's Day, that day would come suddenly but it would not overtake true, faithful Christians as it would thieves. Consequently, they should not be sleepy, but be sure they were alert. They should stay awake and keep their senses literally, be sober. 1th 5. 2-6, 8. Paul also warned Timothy of the apostasy to come, with its danger to the integrity of those Christians who wish to remain true. Timothy, especially, as an overseer, had to be on guard to keep his senses, be sober-minded in all things, to suffer evil, do the work of an evangelizer, fully accomplish his ministry. 2t4. 3-5. In keeping his senses, Timothy was to realize that Paul would not be on the scene much longer. 2t4. 6-8. And Timothy himself would eventually pass off the scene, so he must commit the things learned to faithful men, who, in turn, would be adequately qualified to teach others. 2t2. 2. Thus the congregation would be built up as a bulwark against the apostasy to come, being a pillar and support of the truth. 1t3. 15. The Apostle Peter likewise, knowing that he and his fellow apostles would not be on hand much longer. 2p1. 14. Able to act as a restraint to the apostate movement instigated by the devil, counseled Christians to hold fast to their salvation through Christ, keeping their senses completely literally, being sober perfectly, setting their hope upon the undeserved kindness that was to be brought to them at the revelation of Jesus Christ. 1p1. 13. Knowing the seriousness of the times, with growing persecution from the world, they should be sound in mind, watchful, vigilant, and should not neglect serious prayer, to obtain the strength they would need for endurance. 1p4. 7. He warned them to keep their senses, because the devil was like a roaring lion seeking to devour, and they had to take a solid stand against the devil. This required soberness, seriousness, self-control. 1p5. 8, 9. Soko H possibly, branch of a tree. 1. A Judean city in the Shephelah, seemingly referred to as both Soko and Soko. Jos 15. 20, 33, 35. The Philistines collected their armor together at Soko and then camped at nearby Ephes-Dammim before Goliath's encounter with David. 1-17. 1 year later this Soko was apparently among the cities that Hobom strengthened. 2ch11. 5-7. However, this passage may apply to no. 2. Nevertheless, Soko, along with its dependent towns, was captured by the Philistines more than 200 years later, during King Ahaz's rule. 2ch28. 16-18. It is identified with the ruins at Bedabad Horvat Soko, in the low plain of Elah, about 4 kilometers 2.5 meters of Azekah, although Kbutshuwaika, a short distance to the east, seems to preserve the biblical name. 2. Soko, a city in the mountainous region of Judah. Jos 15. 20, 48. It is often identified with the Kbutshuwaika, about 17 kilometers 11 miles of Hebron. This is a different Kbutshuwaika from the one mentioned in number 1. 3. Soko, a place under the administration of one of Solomon's deputies. 1 Kai 4. 7, 10. The suggested identification of it with Kbutshuwaika Duras, about 15 kilometers 9.5 MWNW of Samaria, seems to fit the account, since the proposed sites of both Arabath and Hepher mentioned with Soko in the king's account are nearby. 4. In the genealogy of Judah, Heber is called the father of Soko. 1ch4. 18. Soko could be a personal name of Heber's descendant, or the text could indicate that Heber was the founder of the city of Soko or its population. Assuming that this latter situation was the case, it is not possible to determine whether the reference is to Soko H number 1 or no. 2. Sodi Sotai, from a root meaning intimate group. a Zebulunite whose son Otextoi acute Muritra Longo. Soldier 985 following year, Chedorlaomer and his allies defeated Bera, the king of Sodom, and his confederates. Besides seizing possessions and foodstuffs, the victors took Lot and others captive. GE 14. 1-12. Abraham's forces overtook Chedorlaomer and recovered the captives and booty, including Lot and his household. The king of Sodom insisted that Abraham keep the recovered material goods, but Abraham refused, lest Bera should say, "It was I who made Abram rich." GE 14. 13-24. Everlasting destruction. Sodom, however, persisted in a course in defiance of Jehovah, becoming known for such immoral practices as homosexuality. The cry of complaint about Sodom and Gomorrah, Jehovah declared, "Yes, it is loud, and their sin, yes, it is very heavy." God therefore sent his angels to destroy Sodom, with the assurance to Abraham that if 10 righteous persons could be found in the place, the whole city would be spared. GE 18. 16, 20-33. The city showed it deserved destruction, for a vile mob of residents of Sodom, including boys and old men, surrounded Lot's house, attempting to rape his angelic guests. The next day, after Lot, along with his wife and 2 daughters, left the city, Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by sulfur and fire. GE 19. 1-29. Lu 17. 28, 29. Thereafter Sodom and Gomorrah became a proverbial figure of utter destruction from God Almighty. To 29. 23. Issa 1. 9. 13. 19. Ja 49. 18. 50. 40. Ba 4. 6. Am 4. 11. Zep 2. 9. Row 9. 29. And of extreme wickedness. The 32. 32. Issa 1. 10. 3. 9. Ja 23. 14. S 16. 46-56. See Gomorrah. Concerning a Jewish city that would reject the good news, Jesus said, "It will be more endurable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on Judgment Day than for that city." Mount 10. 15. 11. 23, 24. Of course, Judah 7 says that Sodom and Gomorrah are placed before us as a warning example by undergoing the judicial punishment of everlasting fire. So Jesus' statement evidently was simply making use of hyperbole to emphasize how unlikely it was that people from certain first-century Jewish cities would repent even on Judgment Day. In a spiritual sense, Revelation 11. 3:8 says that the corpses of God's 2 witnesses lay in the broad way of the great city called in a spiritual sense Sodom and Egypt. Isaiah's prophecy 1:8-10 likens Zion or Jerusalem to Sodom and calls her rulers dictators of Sodom. However, about 96 CE, when John was given the revelation vision of events to occur in the future, the typical city of Jerusalem had been destroyed long before. In 70 CE the reference therefore must be to great city or organization, an archetypical Jerusalem, pictured by unfaithful Jerusalem of old. Soldier. A person who serves in an army. In the Hebrew scriptures military personnel are often precisely designated according to the specific function they served. Cavalrymen X 14. 9, runners 1 Sa 22. 17, slingers 2 Chi 3. 25, men handling the lance and shield 2 Ch 25. 5, shooters 2 Ch 35. 23, archers job 16. 13, or bowmen Issa 21. 17. The Greek word for soldier is strimiddle.t-middle.otes. See army. During the time of Roman domination of Judea, soldiers were a common sight there. The fact that an army officer at Capernaum could say, "For I have soldiers under me," indicates that soldiers were stationed there under his command. Mount 8. 5-9 Roman troops were stationed in the Tower of Antonia in Jerusalem, serving as a point of control over the Jews. The military commander there when Paul made his last visit to Jerusalem rescued him from a mob, and again the next day from the rioting Pharisees and Sadducees. Act 21. 30-35. 22. 23, 24. 23. 10 When a plot against